the National Rifle Association wrote this infamous tweet which told doctors to stay in their lane. Their crucial mistake was trying to tell the American College of Physicians that they shouldn't talk about it. And then they referenced a report from the RAND Corporation, which is one of these famous DC think tanks. Lo and behold, the NRA decided to only read the one line that supported their argument and then forgot the rest of the 400-page book that was out there. So that's what I did, is I sat there and I read through that and decided to write the book using the same metric that the NRA used to tell doctors to stay in their lane, for us to say, oh wait, there are these gun policies that do work. Those of us that actually treat patients every day, we have a right to talk about it. Not only do we have a right to talk about it, we actually understand how science works and not just the politicking. And so this book is a response to that.
All right, y'all. We are here with Dr. Cedric Dark, author of Under the Gun, an ER doctor's cure for America's gun epidemic. Yo, I got a lot of notes from your book, man. This is a really great book. The best way I can summarize this, let me check my notes right here, is basically you got a mix of personal experience, public health analysis, public suggestions to suggest or to address gun violence in the U.S. I got about like 10 points, but for the sake of making this a really good conversation, my man, let's start off with, why did you decide to write this book? Because you are board certified, you went to Morehouse, you work in Houston, you are ER doc. Let's talk about it. Why are you getting in this lane, quote unquote? You know where I'm going with this. Why are you getting in this lane of gun ownership as an ER doc, and you know where you at?
Of gun ownership or the book writing? Which question do you want to answer?
Ooh, let's do, because I'm very interested. I know so for y'all who don't know, Dr. Cedric Dark, he's been in the internet writing space for quite a long time with policy prescriptions, which in essence dumb down medical journals so that senators and your congressmen can really understand, you know, the research that goes into what we do, so that when they make policies, when they make bills, they really understand the science behind it in a way that they can understand, right? So you've been doing this for close to a decade now, if not more.
Pretty much. Right? Over. At this point, getting close to like 20 years. Because when I first started it, the beginnings were like 2006. We launched 2008. Technically, I retired from it after 15 years. So the website, even though we still keep it up, isn't being actively added to. But
Right.
There are, I would say, spin-offs from it. The Emergency Medicine Residents Association, EMRA, they actually do a health policy journal club every month, which is something that we started under sort of a co-publishing platform that, even though I shut my website down, they continue to run.
Well, just to say that you ain't a novice at this, right?
No.
You ain't a novice at writing. So this book right here, you've been, and I appreciate you making time for us because you've been all over the media circuits, promoting this book. The question is why did you decide to write this book, Under the Gun, right? Like,
yeah.
Give us the basis as to why you decided to write that book.
I had no desire to do so whatsoever.
Okay.
Gun policy is kind of like my second biggest interest. My first biggest interest is more like healthcare coverage, universal healthcare, that sort of thing. But in 2018, the National Rifle Association wrote this infamous tweet, which told doctors to stay in their lane. And as you mentioned earlier, I've been doing this for 15 going on 20 years, talking about evidence-based policy. Their crucial mistake was trying to tell the American College of Physicians that they shouldn't talk about it. And then they referenced a report from the RAND Corporation, which is one of these famous DC think tanks that is, if I had to put my own stamp on them, they're probably one of the most quantitatively rigorous think tanks out there in the health policy space, and use the evidence that RAND put out there in their Science of Gun Policy book to tell the ACP that they were overstepping. Lo and behold, the NRA decided to only read the one line that supported their argument and then forgot the rest of the 400-page book that was out there. So that's what I did, is I sat there and I read through that and decided to write the book, the premise of which, using the same metric that the NRA used to tell doctors to stay in their lane, for us to say, oh, wait, there are these gun policies that do work. And, those of us that are physicians, those of us that have experience, like I worked on Capitol Hill. I've worked for Kaiser Family Foundation, or KFF as it's now called. And those of us that actually treat patients every day, we have a right to talk about it. Not only do we have a right to talk about it, we actually understand how science works and not just the politicking. And so this book is a response to that.
And it's been, from what I've seen, it's been very well received. I enjoyed this book. Like I said, I got a lot of notes from it, but I'm very interested as to not just in the book, but just even how you balance. You are an admitted gun owner, right? Number two, you are ER doc, so you know what happens with guns, right? Whether
Hmm.
advertently or inadvertently. And then you've also had a close family member, a cousin, who passed away due to gun violence. Talk
Yeah.
to us about that, how you handle that in the book. How do you handle all of that stuff? Because that's a lot of intersections, right?
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why I was the person that had to write this, because I think if you take a normal person that's just focused on gun violence prevention, but they're maybe not a gun owner, a lot of the credibility that you might get otherwise goes
Yeah, they
out
don't
the
have skin in the
window,
game.
you know? I think,
Is there such
and
thing as skin in the game?
of course it is.
Okay.
I hate that terminology sometimes, but that's more of a policy perspective than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Having a family member die from a firearm, is something that is not unique to me. 1 out of 5 Americans have that happen in their family, number one. But I think it gives us a lead in. So when I'm approaching the reader, I can tell them that story to personalize it a little bit. But I think it does require like all three of those things, being someone that sees gun violence in the workplace, someone that's experienced it, in family setting, but then also somebody that's not anti-gun, but as my friend Esther Chu would say, is anti-bullet hole. Like
Mm-hmm.
realistically, that's what I'm here to do, is to talk about how do we prevent bullet holes from going into people.
Now, the way in which you put it out, like everything is common sense, right? It makes sense, right? Like the ideas, the policies. You, in essence, I think you found the way, or I think we all, uh, when you focus on the science and you focus on the end result as opposed to castigating the person, right? It's like saying someone is a racist. You can't really say someone's a racist. You can say, well, your behavior is racist, right? Or
Hmm.
the end product is racist, or it has some type of, well, that's the end product. I get this point, but talk to us about in this book some of the simple policy recommendations that you make. I think it's very interesting the way how you describe them.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them out there. I'm not going to list them all out because
Right.
whenever I do, I'll of course forget some of them. I think number one, which as you said, common sense, universal background checks, right? Like if I have a gun, I want to sell it to you, I ought to run a background check on you to make sure that you're not some criminal, abusing your spouse, that sort of thing. But unfortunately, 22% of firearm transactions skip that whole background check process. That's
How
one
many?
thing that needs 22%.
Wow.
So about 1 in 5. So that's one thing that just needs to be fixed. And again, if you look at the polling data, whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, pretty much everyone thinks that you should have a background check before you sell a gun to somebody else. Even gun owners think that. So that's one thing. Another thing is what we would call safe storage, and that can be a couple different things. It could mean child access prevention. It could mean that if you have a firearm that, you're keeping it locked, preferably separate from ammunition so that you don't have that risk of someone taking that firearm and harming themselves, whether it's intentionally or unintentionally. So that's another policy that's out there, a policy that's been demonstrated to save people's lives, but it's something that is not universal across all 50 states. That's the crazy thing about the United States, is that a lot of these policies are at the state level. We don't necessarily have
Mm-hmm.
a lot of these things implemented federally. And so there's room for improvement, but it sets up from a scientific perspective a natural experiment. So we can see, well, in states that have policy A versus states that don't have policy A, what kind of impact is there? There's other stuff included as well, including like community violence prevention initiatives, hospital violence intervention programs, those sorts of things. We talk about in the
So
book.
so when you talk about that, you talking about like Dr. Robert Gore's
Yeah,
Kavi up in Brooklyn, New York.
right. I talked about Rob's
Mm-hmm.
program. I talk about Kyle Fisher, who is on sort of a national organization called the Javi, which sort of helps to get all these programs started, coalesced, provide them resources to get them off the ground. So if you're at a hospital that doesn't have that, you want to try to get those going, like that's a good resource for you to reach out
Oh
to.
yeah, yeah,
So there's a bunch of things like that. We even talk about what I like to call the mental health paradox, which is one of those things that we always think, oh yeah, if we just screen people for mental health issues, then that's going to uh, cut back on like violent crime or whatever, which is not necessarily true. This is something that we heard during the vice presidential debate, which actually like caught my ear, because I think one candidate mentioned, we just need more mental health. And then the other vice presidential candidate corrected the record and was like, people with mental health issues aren't necessarily more
yeah.
violent. They're actually more
I think
often
that got
victims.
lost. That got lost in
Yeah,
the back and forth. That got lost in
it
the
did.
back and
Yeah.
forth. Can you
But
explain that again? Can you describe that guy? Because I cut you off actually while you were saying
oh
that.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I think the thing is that we assume because what happens is, there's a shooting that's popularized on television and we're like, oh man, that person must be like mentally ill or whatever. Or you think like maybe they're schizophrenic or something like that. And that's not really the case. Um, you know, people with people with mental illness in this country, are diagnosed all the time, right? Depression, anxiety, all that kind of stuff. Whether or not it's a serious mental illness is a completely separate issue. And even when you're talking about dealing with that, um, restricting firearms to people that have been involuntarily committed for something doesn't necessarily save people's life. Now, this is the interesting part because when I first started this book back in 2019, and I was reading that first iteration of the science of gun policy from Rand, it actually said, yes, it was. As I was reviewing the book, revising it, going through edits and getting it ready to print, that actually changed. That's the scientific process, right? You add more and more studies into sort of a meta-analysis or systematic review, things can change. And so I had to change the way I approach that. So now I approach it more a little agnostically. The reason why I call it a paradox, because there is a mental health problem
Hmm.
in this country as it pertains to guns, but it's really suicide, which no one talks about. Like how many times do you hear on the news somebody, died by firearm suicide? Like never.
But we see it a lot. Within the
We,
ER and the trauma surgery world, we see that a lot.
but we actually see it a whole lot less than we probably otherwise would because firearms are so deadly. If you think of it like a case fatality rate, like 85, 90%, most of the people that attempt it don't make it to the hospital because they're dead in the field.
Mm-hmm.
But that's really where, if we're thinking about mental health, we need to be focusing on is on that aspect of it instead of using mental health as a boogeyman and a distraction. And that's where I think where the politics sort of starts to play into it is because people on one side want to use it as a distraction and then not fund mental health supports for people, right? We miraculously don't have more mental health beds in the system to get folks out the ER that need help, but we keep talking about it as a
Bruh,
problem and,
if
and
people
blaming it.
understood, if people understood the wait times, I think the hardest thing I've seen, and I've seen this a lot, is someone who has intent or has committed a certain act against themselves. Like literally the process of trying to get them into inpatient psych hospitals or just
Mhm.
placement inpatient is one of the hardest things ever.
Yeah,
Because there's
exactly.
either no room or let's say the next day they change their mind or something like that. And because there's no room anticipated, they're like, well, you go home, come back when, it's just like, this is crazy. We see that a lot in these level 1 trauma centers, right? Like,
Hmm.
can we get this person into inpatient? Nope, can't. Um, I got a question for you. With the policy recommendations that you make, we always hear about this: the universal background check, waiting periods, restrictions on gun access for individuals with domestic violence histories. We hear about all that
Hmm.
stuff.
Right.
Is that stuff from a federal standpoint? Is that stuff like is it almost like can it be like a la carte type thing, or does it have to be like if you take one, you got to take it all? Because I just feel like if everybody agrees on it, then why is it so hard to implement at least universal background checks? Why is it so hard to individually get like waiting periods and so forth? Explain that to me.
I think there's a lot of weeds that get into that, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there are mental health checks, there are domestic violence checks out there, but there are loopholes in this, and this is one of the loopholes that that law that was recently passed a couple of years ago, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, tried to resolve. One called the boyfriend loophole, right?
Mm.
So first of
Okay.
all, if you run a background check on somebody and they have a felony conviction for domestic violence, felony just means greater than a year sentence, then at that point, they are eliminated from owning firearms, right? If let's say their sentence is 364 days, or it becomes a misdemeanor, then that doesn't necessarily apply into that background check process. Or if it's, let's say, a boyfriend that's not cohabitating, that doesn't have a child, it's not a spouse of that individual, then they are not really required to be reported as well, even though
Mhm.
that's the same violent person, same violent act. And so there's a federal floor on some of this stuff. And then different states top it up. So some states do have background checks on every firearm transaction. Some do have waiting periods. Some require licenses. Like you'd have to get a license maybe in Hawaii or something to then be able to go out and buy a firearm, right? Which if you're feeling suicidal, puts time and space between you to be able to go out and buy one. Unlike if you're in Texas, if you want to go to a store, you can run over to one now within the time it takes to process that federal background check, that FBI background check, which on average is 2 minutes. You can walk out the store with a gun, you know.
That quick.
I mean, there was recently like a shooting at Lakewood Church, Joel Osteen's church. You
Hmm.
may have heard
Yeah.
about that in the news. There's literally a store that sells guns walking distance from that church, right? So in my mind, I'm like, I wonder if the person just, went to the store, bought the gun, walked over there, that kind of thing. That's the way I think. But that there's that floor you have from the federal, and then you have states that can do things on their own on top of that, and that's where there's a lot of difference, state to state, and that variation allows us to look at the policies and then see what happens with firearm mortality as a result of it, and be able to determine their effectiveness.
You ever get any pushback on like taking a stance? Because you know, I, I think the history of doctors, at least, is you kind of just treat the patients. You don't really kind of
Right.
commentate on things. So, I mean, you could take it as far as even within your own specialty group, right? ASEP. Like,
Hmm.
what's the lay of the land, right? Because, we have, I forget what the percentage is, right? But you have so many physicians who are Democrat, you have so many physicians who are Republican. Like, it's not, we're not a monolith, right? So, in terms
Right.
of like the reception of this book, how's it going even within your specialty group?
So, and I don't know if you read the part yet where I talk about one of my coworkers, Paul Torrey. He's a life NRA life member,
Hmm.
who literally thinks that the Second Amendment is what protects the rest of the amendments of the Constitution. That's his viewpoint. But then again, if you throw these policies in front of him, making sure people got to be screened before they get guns, and making sure that they haven't beat their spouse, he can agree with that. And whenever I go talk anywhere, I get the same reception. There's always a firearm owner, a hunter, somebody like that, former military, that comes up to me either before or after the conversation. And typically when we talk about it, they happen to be some of the people that want some of the most
Hmm.
stringent restrictions, because they understand what responsibility looks like for a gun owner, right? They understand that you should have your firearm available to you, but you shouldn't have one if you don't have a right to have one. If you're, not of a certain age, age greater than 21 is one of those other policies. It's a reasonable policy that can prevent loss of life. They often will believe you need to be trained. You need to know that when you touch a gun, the first thing is you don't point it at anything you're not ready to destroy. They don't understand how someone can accidentally get shot, because you should never be pointing a gun at a target that you don't want to kill, right?
Hmm.
And I think for those folks that actually were in the military and or are hunters, they recognize this. I actually was talking this past weekend in North Carolina, and a hunter came up to me and was even further. I think than I am in terms of restriction because he's like, when I'm going hunting, what's the point of having a semi-automatic? Because he's a deer hunter. It's like if you miss on the first shot, you just don't get that deer, you know.
Yeah.
So
I could say the same. You know, I that's kind of well. Anyway, I'll let you keep going. I'll let
yeah,
you keep going.
no, I'm just saying from that standpoint. So the ones I actually get the most pushback from actually tend to be people more on the left, a little upset that I'm not pushing harder on things like an assault weapons ban.
Hmm.
Because again, when we look at the data on that, the best data that we have says that an assault weapons ban we should be agnostic on.
Really? Why? Explain that. Because I mean, that was the big thing back in the '90s, the
Yeah,
Bradley Bill and all that stuff. And
yeah, Brady
you know,
Bill.
we had
Yeah,
Brady Bill. Excuse me, the Brady Bill. I apologize. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
it's okay.
But we got like what was that? 10 years? 15 years of?
It was 10 years of an assault weapons ban, I think, from Bill Clinton. It expired in
Right.
the Bush administration. And yes, we saw numbers go down. And this is where it's going to get a little nerdy here. Because remember, I was talking to you about natural experiments, right?
Yes.
If
From one
every,
state to another state.
right, from
Yeah.
one state to another state difference. When you have a national assault weapons ban, you don't have a different state to state. So you can't really do that same kind of study. So the strength of the study isn't as strong. That's why the recommendation is kind of null because, you can't reject the null hypothesis, as it were, because the study type isn't great. It'd be different if you had assault weapons bans in some states, not in other states. And then you can look at the data to see how that plays out. The other
I
thing
told
too,
y'all he knows his stuff, y'all. I'm telling you. I
yeah,
keep telling y'all.
this is also why I've taught journal club for years and years,
Uh,
which my residents hate me because I always ask them about power calculations, you know, but you got to think of it that way too, right? In terms of statistical power, right? How many people do you think die from assault weapons in this country, aka mass shootings in this country? Give me a guess, Nee.
from mass shootings, how many people die from mass
Yeah, per
shootings?
year
I'd say in the 100,000.
in the hundred. Well, first of all, when we're talking like gunfire deaths, we're only talking 48,000, only 48,000 people every year, right?
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. Out of that 48,000, the number of people that die in mass shootings is around 600.
Really?
Okay. There's more people that die from police shootings than from mass shootings. We don't talk about that at all, right?
Okay.
You don't hear
But
about that in
a
the
mass
news.
shooting is what we would be what 6 people or more dead or something. What's the
Like usually the stats like about four more people, I believe shot at one time in one incident. Doesn't necessarily have to kill all four of them.
right? And that doesn't
So
necessarily have to be like something that you see on TV, right? Like that's
right. It's literally a murder suicide and then you kill your two kids, right?
right,
That's a mass shooting
right.
in essence. And
So
most
only
of those
so that's
things
not
are
much
going to
then.
have,
Okay.
it's not much, but I mean, it's not a lot. So you're talking about a small number that you're trying to look for a difference between the assault weapons ban, and then you don't really have good study or
Hmm.
a good situation to say state A versus state B versus state C. In terms of that, it's going to be hard to find a difference. It's a lot easier to find a difference in things that are going to stop suicide because suicide's the number one cause of firearm fatality in this country, usually 2 to 1 to homicide. And each one of those is in at least above the 15,000 for suicide, usually above the 20,000 range every year. So we're talking those two things are relatively easy to research and to study. The other stuff that we get all the news about, harder to study. And so that's why, like, my perspective is very agnostic on it. You
Hmm.
can decide to do whatever you want to do. And you had mentioned what our medical professionals, professional societies talk about. ASAP has a assault weapons ban called for in their firearm policy.
Hmm.
So that goes further than where I stand, because again, and you know me, I've been doing this for
Well,
15 to 20 years.
right.
It's all about evidence-based health policy, right? So that's
Ah,
what I'm
I see.
focusing in on is I'm sticking where the evidence is.
Now, should someone a physician who's reading your book, is there a possibility that they can get a different message depending on where they reside or where they practice? Like a physician who reads your book, who's from, a populous city area, Houston, Los Angeles, Atlanta, New York City, versus a physician who works in the middle of, the Midwest, Pennsylvania. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Can they get or glean two different messages or different messages from your book depending on where they practice at?
I think so. I mean, quite frankly, like this is how we approach any other kind of
Hmm.
uh, risk prevention or risk reduction strategy, right? I mean, you talk to your patients, wear your seatbelt
Right.
when they're leaving the trauma ICU or whatever, like you're discharging them home. Like wear your seatbelt, wear a helmet if
Hmm.
you're riding a bike or a motorcycle, that kind of thing. Um, this is the same sort of situation.
Actually, I tell
You're
them never
providing.
get back on a motorcycle again. Actually,
Well, that's fair. That's fair. You know, you can
I
never get
can't
on a
lie. I
motorcycle
tell them,
again.
yeah.
But again, like you can't command that of them, right? You
Hmm.
can tell them what your recommendation is. You can tell them your personal history, what you've seen and everything. You tell them, the science says you're going to at least be more likely to survive it if you're inside of a car with a ceiling and walls than if you're thrown off of a two-wheeled vehicle with nothing around you, right? Um, and that's the best sometimes we can do is give people the information. So yeah, everybody I think is going to approach it from their own perspective. I think gun owners are going to approach it one way, non-gun owners are going to approach it another way. The main point is that we have a conversation.
Okay, so for a doc who's listening to this, med student who's listening to this right now, they read this book. What's the easiest thing they can do right now to even start the conversation to say, I want to do my part in trying to reduce gun violence. I want to do my part to, this is America's gun epidemic. What can I do to change that? What do you want them to get from this? Or
This
what
is
can they
our
do?
lane.
Excuse me.
This is our lane. That's
Mm-mm.
the main point. That's the last four words in the book.
Yeah.
Essentially is we have a right to talk about this, just like we have a right to tell our patients to not get on a motorcycle again or to wear their seatbelt when they get in a car. So we have those rights to do that as physicians, and we shouldn't have a gag order put in front of us, much like Florida tried to do to their pediatricians years ago and got overturned because we do have free speech rights as physicians to say what we need to say to our patients to make them safe and healthy.
Mm.
Now,
I
if
love
you
it.
happen to be a gun owner that's also a physician, there's a
Okay.
second message. That second message is store your guns safely because I don't
You
want
think
your
they're,
kids
well, that's
shooting
true. That's
themselves.
probably docs. Yeah, that's probably docs who, yeah, they're not listening or at least practicing what you would think they would want to preach, which is like what you said. Not everybody. Yeah.
Well, I was one of them.
You didn't lock your stuff up.
Nope. Not until my kid turned 4, got his remote control that we hold up on the mantle in front of the TV, pulled his little tiny chair out, slid it up there, got up on the mantle, and got the remote. When I saw that, I was like, I gotta lock this thing up because my gun's like not even that high up, in a drawer somewhere.
Now
So,
yours is that like I've been exposed to guns, as a kid and I like to shoot them, or is it just for protection? Like what's your motivations?
so mine started out as a protective
Hmm.
motivation. So we moved into Houston within a couple months of moving into, the middle of the city. We actually got robbed, or burglarized, I guess, not robbed. Someone broke into the house and, I showed up after shift, found like the back door busted in, all that kind of stuff. The next day, my wife went to the store, bought some guns. She's the real Texan, so
Oh, so she don't play.
yeah, nah, 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 nah. So, and so, that's why we started being gun owners, I would say. After that, like once you get guns, they're fun to go to the
Mhm.
range and shoot. I mean, like you're a surgeon, it's
I
about
think
like
for me,
dexterity and hand-eye
it's the
coordination, all that stuff.
it's the destructive capability that's still kind of. So I had an experience where I was in Georgia when I was training at Morehouse,
Hmm. Yeah.
and I did something that was near Columbus, Georgia.
Hmm.
So we went a little bit into Alabama and went to a gun range, and it was. I'll leave it to like this: like the doctor had an AR-15,
Yeah.
had some other things. It was as exhilarating as it was scary
Oh
also
yeah.
at the same time. It was just like, wow, like
Yeah.
we're shooting at targets and stuff like that on a gun range safely, but you get this adrenaline rush, but then it's also like, damn, like the destructive capability of this, is just, it's crazy. So,
Absolutely. Like that, the first time I went shooting was in college. I took a course that was taught in Spelman. I went to Morehouse undergrad. So you're allowed to cross register. So I took this class called outdoor education, did like camping and hiking and all this other stuff. And one of the things was going skeet shooting. So that's where I learned to shoot a firearm. I feel like I didn't actually appreciate it until I had my own guns. And then going to the range to shoot. We actually had one of our nurse practitioners teach us how to shoot because he's former military and actually can source things that are even more professional than an AR-15, right? So we actually shot an M4 rifle, which again, it shoots like a breeze. And I'd agree with you. It's the exact same thing you're talking about, where it's
Wow.
exhilarating, but then at the same time, you realize if it's this easy to shoot, you can see how easy it is to mow people down
Yeah.
from a long distance as well. So again, I get the whole assault weapons ban thing. I don't think it would be wrong to do in that sense. But from the evidence-based perspective, that's why I'm saying I'll be agnostic on it.
Mm. Well, there it is, guys. That's Dr. Cedric Dark, author of Under the Gun, an ER doctor's cure for America's gun epidemic. Guys, you can get this on Amazon right now. I got my pre-order in, but it's available on Amazon. We'll put the links in the show notes. And Dr. Cedric, man, I'm proud of you, man. Guys, we go as far back as med school. We didn't go to the same med school, but we know each other as far back as med school. And I just want to say I'm really proud of like the strides that you've made and stuff. And you done made it. So, I wish you all the luck in promoting this book. I hope it reaches and gets out to as many people as possible. And I hope that this is part of literally the solution to the gun epidemic that we have right now, because we definitely need a solution right now. So, Dr. Cedric Dark, thank you for coming on Docs Outside the Box, man. We appreciate it, bro.
Thank you so much. Good seeing you, man.